excited to look out here and see this many people here. If I would have bet with some people, I would be really rich right now because I am so excited you all came. My name's Martha Tasker. I'm going to take this mask off because I think it'll make it better for you, and I know it'll be better for me, so thank you. I'm Martha Tasker, and I'm the Director of Utilities for the City of Salina. This young lady up front said, how long have I worked with the city? And I said about 18 years, and prior to that I worked for an engineering firm here in Salina on a lot of city projects. Typically I do water and wastewater. They hide my work outside of town or they bury it in the ground. So to work on this river renewal project has been another real pleasure for me to actually work on something that's you're all going to be able to touch and see and not run from or roll your window up when you drive by. So glad for that. And we have a lot of presentations, so I'm going to try to quit telling jokes and move on. All right, Eric, did I break this?
Down arrow?
See if I can, yeah, okay. I'm kind of the opening act for our presentation tonight. I'm going to cover a very minimal about the background. Then I'm going to pass it off to HDR Engineering, that's been the consultant for the city on the River Renewal project, and are also a sub-consultant for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is a partner on our project. You're going to learn a lot more about all of them and our partnership with Corps as we move forward. And they'll talk more about the plan selection and Phase 1, which is our first construction project, or the project that you'll actually get to see something that's kind of impressive in the community. And then at the end, we have a survey. We want your opinion. The community through this project has really stepped up and came to a lot of public meetings, gave a lot of good insight, and we want to carry that on and keep the public involved because this really is a community project and it takes a community to make it successful. So just a little bit of background to give you some insight to the project. In the lower left-hand corner is a picture of Salina in 1951. The floodwaters came, really inundated the community. So in the late 50s, early 60s, a flood control levee and a bypass channel was built. And I believe I better get closer if I'm going to be able to make my pointer work. So the bypass channel, and I don't know if that's really clear for you, was cut out here kind of in the rock bank along the east side of kind of, here's Billbrook Park, Indian Rock, and around through there. So the water was diverted to go this way. In the good old days, the water traveled through the city, around through the parks, out by Lakewood, and then tied back in. That's roughly 6.8 miles. One of the situations where we are today is this area now in the river channel takes in the flow from about 5 square miles of downtown Salina in the community. Back in the day, the Smoky Hill River picked up about over 8,300 square miles of area. And the unintended consequence is when that bypass channel was cut and the flood control levee was built, a pipe 54-inch in diameter was installed in that levee to let the water through. And that pipe's capacity is 100 cubic feet per second. And I look back in 2019, we had high water, and at that time we had 7,000 cubic feet per second. So that gives you an idea. That's 70 times what can actually go through that pipe. And if we were prior to Canoe Lake, the flows coming through the community that caused the floods are what you saw. So we're very limited, and the unintended consequence is all the sediment settled out. So from Billbrook Park to Ohio, it's got 6 to 8 feet of sediment. And I refer to that as the coffee filter that's kind of a drip filter that barely lets water through. And currently, no base flow. There's over 76 storm drains that tie into this. So basically, it's a storm drain system today. And Oh, these are just some photos that give you a little idea of kind of what the channel can look like. It's just kind of a lot of sediment in there. Here's the sediment. You can kind of see it dried up there. Storm drain. This is Friends of the River Cleanup Day. And somebody says, why do you have a sign? Well, when we started the project, many people said, where's the river? And so where the river crosses all the streets, we put up signs so you know where the river is and could start getting a feel for it. So really tonight's purpose, we've come a long way. We've got our 30% plans done, excuse me, that were prepared by HDR, and it's for the entire 6.8 miles. We've been working as a partner with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but I'm gonna leave that to Eric and John from HDR. But we're to a point where they need us to make a decision to move forward with the work they're doing. And as a community, you've been really good at helping us, guide us. So that's why we're here tonight, is really, I'd like to get some idea what you think is our best plan to move forward with. I intend to take that to the City Commission on December 20th, based on what we hear tonight. The City Commission was updated on November 1st, and hopefully tonight we'll get some good input from all of you. Excuse me. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Eric Dove. He's the project manager from HDR. You got your own.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Wonderful. So I tend to pace around a little bit, so I apologize ahead of time, but hopefully you can see what's behind me. So we've already had 3 public meetings. At one of the very first public meetings, we wanted to know what was the most important goal. We know we have limited funding, so with that limited funding, what do we have to get done? Number 1 goal is to get the water flowing. At the end of the day, if we don't do that, we haven't accomplished the community's goals. And so this was the chart that you see. And number 1, let's get the water flowing, but then after that, it started to talk about trails and bridges. So we'll talk through some of those elements today. So when we looked at different programs and knowing that the community wanted to get the water flowing, but also working with the stakeholders, they wanted a natural channel. What that did is that opened up a funding opportunity where we could go to the Corps and ask for this 1135 ecosystem enhancements. That's a program the Corps has that funds 75 to 25 of the construction costs. So 25% local funds, 75% federal, and they have a $10 million cap. So this program fit beautifully with the Corps, with the community's goals, what they wanted to build. In blue are all the elements that would qualify under the Corps plan, and in green are some of the additional master plan elements that I'll show you some of the ideas on funding that we have coming up. And then the Corps has a process where we go through the feasibility study, and then they stop and they say, okay, community, what is your locally preferred plan? And so John's going to get up and talk a little bit more about that. But at the end of the day, that's what we have to accomplish for the Corps to keep moving, is select a locally preferred plan. So I want to talk a little bit about these alternatives. Hopefully you had a chance to look at the boards and see what these alternatives are. I heard a lot of questions, well, where's the master plan? We showed a trail, we showed different canoe and kayak. So I want to spend a little time showing what part the Corps is going to fund through this process and what's still in the master plan, and also to remind ourselves, it's been a little while since we talked through the master plan. So first on Alternative 1. Alternative 1 was intended to be a low-cost alternative, and Alternative 2 was intended to create more habitat. We had several other alternatives, but when we worked through the feasibility, the cost-effective ones and the ones that the Corps would support really boiled down to these 2 alternatives. So Alternative 1 connects up the existing culverts and gets water flowing. As Martha said, we have 7 to 8 feet of sediment that's already piled up at South Ohio. So we're going to get the water flowing downhill again, and we're going to use the majority of the Corps' money to remove that sediment out of there. So under Alternative 1, we end up with a 3.5-foot, fairly uniform channel that can move about 60 CFS. So it does have a base flow component to it. What is included on Alternatives 1 and 2 we do have a sedimentation pond we're going to build. Where we're at is we're on the north side of Billboard Park. There's a flood control levee right here. Martha mentioned the culvert that goes under. We're going to leave the levee alone. We're going to leave the culvert alone. We're going to do the flood fight the same way it is today. So there will be no change in our flood fight conditions and the flood control. At the entrance, we're going to have a series of gates that will go up and down with the river. So we're pulling off the cleanest water off the top of the river. And that'll go into a small pond where the sediment can pile up. Every 5 to 10 years, we'll have to clean out that pond. But by doing that, that's so much cheaper than trying to clean out the entire river. So this saves us a lot of cost by doing it this way. Once we go through the levee, on the left is one of the master plan graphics we had. And the Corps will pay for everything you see in blue, which is the excavation of the channel. We stay on alignment. The existing trail that's there would stay. Moving on down around the corner to South Ohio. So here's South Ohio, and right here is the culvert that is completely clogged. You can't even see it on the upstream side. So we will excavate. So the Corps will pay to excavate the sediment, but the only way we can get water flowing is we have to replace the culvert. So the Corps will not pay for the culvert or putting the lanes of traffic back, so that'd be a city cost. So the city will pay for that as part of this Corps project. We also show where potentially where a boathouse and kayak and canoe launch could go. And we made sure that each alternative will fit with this concept. So this feature here will not be built as part of the Corps funding. So that's an upcoming phase that we're looking for additional funds for. We also show a trail running along the north side right here. And we have about half the funding secured for that. And the city's working hard to design the rest of that trail and get the right-of-way secured. Moving on through, you can see the trail comes all the way out and will eventually go around YMCA. And then the blue is the channel that would be paid for by the Corps. And then we have a proposed maintenance facility that would go in the future. Now, because we're connecting into all the existing culverts now, we will not have canoe and kayak access yet. We have to replace 7 bridges to make that happen. So this maintenance facility is intended to be launched with a boat ramp, so we won't need this yet. That'll be deferred. And then coming around YMCA, we tie into the YMCA driveway culvert. We continue with the excavation coming down through Greeley. Greeley is an existing bridge, so we'll just excavate right through it. And then the midway, there are plans in the master plan to realign the midway, and that'll come at a future phase. Right now, we'll tie into the midway culvert using the Corps' money. Coming on down through, we go through where we're today, and with the bridge, and moving down through Kenwood into Oakdale. And then that'll continue, and we daylight the excavation. We stop the excavation around Mulberry Street, and that's where we can get the water flowing downhill again. So once again, we have a free-flowing channel. And then once we're past Mulberry, it gets fairly deep, as it is today. So where I'm at now, I jumped to the north side of Iron, and this is about the location of Western Sawmill Dam. And through there, we want to take the dam out. The dam's old, it needs to be replaced. And so the Corps is willing to pay for the removal of the dam and then replacement with step weirs. So these will be rock structures, about 2 feet of drop each, where we step down. So right now, you go over the Western Star Mill and it'd be a dramatic fall on the backside. So in the future, once we get these in, these would be canoe and kayak navigable, but it also holds that water up. So we don't have to excavate more water, and we don't want the water way down at the bottom of the channel. And so this option would be paid for by the Corps. This is a rendering from the master plan that shows what it would look like if you're standing under Iron and looking north. You can see the grain silos in the distance. Over here is a community theater on your right. And so what the Corps would pay for are these rock structures and the step pools. And the Western Star Mill currently sits right about here, close to where this bridge is. Now the bridge and the trail, so that would be a future city project. So hopefully you're seeing a trend. So this program is really geared toward the bottom of the channel, but it's not all. And we made sure that it's going to work with the master plan. When we dig out the sediment, we have to go somewhere with it. We could haul it out of town, but it's much more expensive to do that. So if we can find a beneficial use for that material, the community gets the benefit and we get a lower construction cost, which means we can remove more sediment. So it is a win-win under that condition. In the public meetings, there was a lot of concern over the condition of the south side of Lakewood Lake. It is low. When the levee was built, when the water was cut off, the water level in that lake dropped 6, 7, 8, 9 feet. And then occasionally it comes back up, like you saw the flooding just a couple years ago. But what that does is that kills off the vegetation on the south side. The Parks Department has a really hard time maintaining it. So there's a request that with this sediment, we build trails. So in the south side of Lakewood Lake, we show some trail networks through here. And those will be built on top of the fill that we excavate from the channel. So all that sediment will be put to beneficial use. In addition, we're going to connect the channel back to Lakewood Lake like it was back in the past. And so we're going to restore that elevation as we restore flow to the river. So Lakewood Lake won't be quite as green as what it is today. It's going to be a deeper, a nicer lake, and then a much more interesting habitat on this south end with some wetland features. So our fill would create features like this, these wetland features. And where you see the blue would be no fill. That's as this water comes up. And so we'll be able to utilize both those features. Because we're using the sediment in this creative way to create these wetland features, this project is considered to be self-mitigating. In other words, we create as much or more wetlands than what we impact, which is really important as we go through our environmental analysis. Alternative 2 is very similar to what I just showed. Hopefully you saw from the boards. It's a little bit more of a natural channel. There's going to be shallower sections. In Kansas, riffles are typically just shallow. It's not your Rocky Mountain stream, right? So we're going to be about 3 foot deep as we go through shallow sections. And then through the pools, we're going to deepen up to 4 to 5 feet deep, maybe 6 feet deep in areas. And that is very reflective of a natural system. So as we start looking at the biological features of this, the ecosystem value, Alternatives 2 scores much higher under the Corps program. So the Corps prefers Alternative 2 due to the habitat, but Alternative 2 does cost about $1 million more, mostly for the excavation. So in a natural channel system, these are basically self-maintaining. There are higher velocities in these shallow sections, and then it goes through that deeper pool section, which dissipates the energy. If you like to fish, this is a historic picture of people fishing along the outside, and that is the deepest section. And that's really what Alternative 2 is intended to mimic, these shallow areas and then the deeper areas as you go outside the pool. So as we look at Alternative 1 versus Alternative 2, you're not going to see a tremendous difference. So Alternative 1, here's the top width, 45 at South Ohio. It's slightly wider under Alternative 2. And you'll see that as a trend. Basically, Alternative 2 always ends up just a little bit wider. Now, Alternative 2 will sometimes be shallower and sometimes deeper than Alternative 1. So you can see the depth at 4.2 on South Ohio versus 4.5. But other places it's deeper. So here's 5.4 versus 4.4 of water depth. Now, either alternative produce a nice wide channel. We generally fill the entire bottom of the channel as it exists today. But Alternative 2, because it moves more sediment and it's more creatively sculpted, creates that additional habitat and also defers some maintenance. So if we remove the sediment using federal funds, that means we won't have to go out and maintain it ourselves using city funds as quickly. So when we break down the cost, as I mentioned, the Corps will pay for the clean out, but like at South Ohio, we have to pay for the culverts and the roads for all that to go back. So when you break everything down, this is how it breaks out. So the cost share from the Corps is $9.5 million toward construction, and The city cost share would be $6.1 million under Alternative 1. And the Corps program is capped. So both options, we receive as much federal funding as we can. We don't leave money on the table. And the city cost share is about 7.1, so about $1 million more. And the city's costs aren't all cash, so the city can do in-kind services. So the work that city staff does, like Martha's time spent on this, will count towards that cash. Also, the Corps has an interesting program where they look at the land that you own, that you're going to build on, and they value that land. And the value of the land assessment also goes towards your cash match. So this isn't all cash out the door. So it's a mix. And what the Corps is going to be asking from us, which is the locally preferred plan, so that they could really dig into these costs and start going through those land assessments. So as I mentioned, the Corps prefers Alternative 2, and so what is that locally preferred plan? And I will say tentatively, everyone I've talked to prefers 2. I really haven't found anyone that really prefers Alternative 1, and so I think that is our tentatively selected plan, but we want to hear more from you on that. So when I summarize this into just a simple pros and cons, Alternative 1 was intended to be the low-cost option to meet the community goals. I think it does a good job of that. The disadvantage of Alternative 1 is because we're not removing as much sediment, eventually when those 75, 76 storm drains dump in, it eventually is going to fill back in. And so when we clean that out, that would be 100% city cost. So there's a little bit more maintenance, and it's not as deep, so you probably have to do that maintenance sooner than Alternative 2. Alternative 2 hits on several fronts. It has a more natural appearance, higher habitat points according to the Corps' scoring system. And when we asked the Corps at the commission meeting which one is more likely to get funded, they said Alternative 2 simply because it scores higher at this national level, and then the reduced maintenance. So we want to talk a little bit about the Phase 1 implementation. So I've been talking about the Corps program a lot, digging out the sediment, showing which alternatives fit. And several people asked me, well, what about the bridges? What about the kayak and canoe trails? So we did want to touch on that. So first, let's have John come up and talk through this Corps program and how it's going to fit in with going forward.
Thanks, Eric. I'm good. Appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. John Denlinger. I'm with HDR, working with Eric on this project. I do want to spend just a few minutes talking with you about the Corps of Engineers program and how it fits into the Smoky Hill project. So what you're seeing up here on the screen there in the upper left is the City Commission update. We did that back on November 1st. Shared a lot of the information that you're going to hear tonight. A lot of the materials that are in the back of the room were shared at that commission meeting. So next is our city meeting. That is where we are today. So you are here. It's the second stop there on the chart. So again, we want to get to that locally preferred plan. You'll see 2 alternatives, 1 and 2, as Eric described and as we've got on the boards back there. And we're looking for your feedback this evening so that later this month a decision can be taken to the City Commission and we can identify that locally preferred plan, which will allow the Corps to continue with their feasibility study, as Eric said, to also dig into some of the costs further and better define that selected plan through the feasibility study process. So then you can see the other activities going forward from there. There will be another Corps of Engineers led public meeting next year. It will be centered around that city selected plan. We also have a step that we have to get through there in the middle, the project partnership agreement. So currently the feasibility study is fully funded. We can get through that complete. When we get to the end of that feasibility study to take the next step into design and then construction, we need a new project partnership agreement between the city and the Corps of Engineers. There is no additional partnership agreement past that point, so once we clear that hurdle, we're all the way through the agreement part of design and construction. You see some tentative timelines on there. A lot of this is subject to available federal funding, and I'll get to that in just a second. Actually, next slide. Thank you. So I just talked about partnership agreements. The 1135 program that this project is going through with the Corps of Engineers, any new agreements are currently on an indefinite hold. They're trying to use the funding that is currently available where they can to advance projects, but as far as advancing new projects, again, there's an indefinite hold on that right now. So again, we can get all the way through feasibility, but at some point we're going to have to get to a point where a new agreement can be signed to go through design and construction. So again, like I mentioned, this whole process is subject to annual funding appropriations. So, you know, those come around essentially once a year with all the other federal funding. This is through Energy and Water Act. But we do have some positive news, at least for this project potentially, and that is, of course, the infrastructure bill. So with the passage of that bill, there should be a greater potential likelihood of projects of this nature being able to be funded much more than they had been, certainly without the $1.2 trillion. So in addition to that, we are continuing to explore other funding sources. As Eric mentioned, the 1135 program is focused on ecosystem restoration. So the Corps can participate in things that restore the habitat. So getting the water flowing through the old Smoky Channel, getting enough habitat features in there to restore the habitat. We can partner with the Corps to get funding on that. There are other features and amenities that don't necessarily contribute directly towards habitat that we can pursue other funding mechanisms to move those things forward. So this kind of presents the multiple pathways forward here. So the top arrow, the city is of course advancing through, completed the master planning. We're into the design phase at 30% right now. You can see the remaining items there that the city would be leading. The Corps of Engineers, we are currently in feasibility phase. Once that selected plan is identified, we can complete the feasibility. And then eventually with a new project partnership agreement, we can move into design and construction. And then the third bar there at the bottom is, again, continuing to seek additional funding opportunities to leverage some of these other features that would be adjacent to the stream and contribute to a positive project.
Thank you, John. So we touched on the schedule. If you notice, that core schedule tends to drag out a ways. And so one of the questions we had for the community back in the public meetings is, as these programs come online and we start to get our matching funds, how quickly should we go and how do we spend our money? What area, so we know we have to get the water flowing, but what area do we now focus on? So the Lakewood Lake Park from the survey was the number 3 top area. And so through the Corps program, we will put the sediment there and start creating the amenity there. So I do think through the Corps program, we start to address that goal. The second goal was Founders Park. And so that's on the north side of Iron, behind the community theater. And that's where we're taking out Western Star Mill and putting the step pools in. So I think we've done a good job matching up the Corps program with the community goals. The number 1 goal, however, was downtown. And you'll notice that's not part of the Corps program. So we do have a potential phase 1 plan that really wants to focus in on downtown. We want to build 4th Street Plaza, and we can really expand that or decrease it. So right now I show about 2.8 million 4th Street Plaza, which gets us about a quarter of the way through. I'd like to build Iron Bridge, and I'll show you a few examples of what that could look like. And then a few other bridges such as Ash, Elm. We also, if we're inviting people down to the water, we don't want that filled with trash. So I'd like to spend a little money on trash collection BMPs. And a bandalog is a floating trash collector that would be out of sight. And then phase 1 trails. We can utilize a lot of the existing trail pieces and parts to get a continuous trail network put together all the way from Billboard Park all the way up to Iron. So there are some good things we can do. Now we do have those obligations with the Corps, so once we go forward with a locally preferred plan that obligates some of our money. So after we obligate the funds to the Corps, we have roughly 7.4 versus 6.3, depending if we go alternative 1 or 2. And so if you look at the cost of what we'd like to do for phase 1, about 9.7 million, we end up between $2 to $3 million short on phase 1. So there are some additional funds we want to get. We don't want to just spend city money, but this will take some time. So one of the survey questions are, do we continue to look for additional grant funding sources, knowing that this is going to stretch out a little farther, but we'll be able to build so much more? So that's on the survey question, because I'd love to start construction today. I absolutely would. But we can build so much more if we leverage our local funds with federal funds. So at Iron Avenue, these are from the master plan. You'll recognize the laser cut panels from the Santa Fe streetscape. And this are the initial renderings of what Iron Avenue would look like. So it ties in all those laser cut panels. These are on the sides. They're also kind of a modern twist on Art Deco. So it ties in all the streetscape and ties that in, and would be a beautiful facility. 4th Street Plaza. So when we developed the master plan, the car museum was just being considered. So they've done a wonderful job with the restoration there. So 4th Street Plaza would switch this out into brick, and we'd be able to close that for community events. There would be a variety of splash pads, water features to activate the space with both kids and different food venues. So if you were to stand on the new Iron Bridge and look out, the brick building, that is the car museum. And then we'd have a grand staircase taking us down to Water's Edge. We'd have event space, so we could set up, if we want outdoor music, that's all in the plan. So really a neat space, right connected to downtown, really aligned with the community's goals. This is where we should spend our money. So how do we get this done?
Was that in 1 and 2 or just 2?
Neither. Neither. So the question was this park element in alternative 1 or 2? So the Corps will pay for the excavation, creation of the habitat, but all the amenities the Corps will not pay for. So we have to pay for it. And how do we find the funding for it? Well, there's actually 7 bridges we have to replace if we want canoes and kayaks. I just showed you Iron. The other bridges aren't as ornate or as expensive, but we do have to find additional funding for all these bridges. And there are federal grant programs out there. This is one particular one. This is Transportation Discretionary Grants. It comes out each year. Last year there was $1 billion in that program. We anticipate it'll be much, much larger this next year. This spring we'd like to put an application together. All the public meetings, all the master planning we do feeds right into that document. It allows us to quickly complete that document, and it would score really well. Technically, there is no cost match. Typically, we go in with about a 10% cost match to elevate our application. But these come out, they keep changing names. They were Tiger for a while, then they were called Build, then they were called Raise. Last year was Raise. So we'll see if the Biden administration comes out with a different acronym. We'll see what that is. They're all similar, but with their own little twist each year. So that new application will come out in the spring. And so we'd like to go for all 7 bridges, not just iron. And this would lower our cost down tremendously. So now phase 1 looks tremendously different. KDOT also has started up some of their funding programs. They were in deficit funding for a while, but their programs are coming back. In addition, with the infrastructure bill, we don't know yet. It's been said that a large amount's be going to the various transportation departments. So they'll pay for trails. They will also pay for bridges. We have several elements of our master plan that would qualify. So I'd like to focus in on these transportation elements. Let's get those bridges replaced. Let's focus in on some of the trails that the community really wanted, but it takes time. And with the state of Kansas, they require a 15% match. So if you notice, all these matches are better than the core program. The core program's a 25-75, where here we only have 15% for KDOT. So that's a glimpse of what we're looking at moving forward, what sort of grants are coming up. I do think it's hard for me to wait. I'm not a patient person, especially when I know the wonderful benefits for this community. But I do think we should wait. Let's get these grants in. I think we're at a unique precipice in timing with the infrastructure bill. So let's see how much of that master plan we can get built. Let's see how much we can really focus in on those transportation elements, which are the heaviest lift. Once we get those 7 bridges replaced, canoes and kayaks become viable. The pedestrian underpasses become viable. So anyway, that's where I'm at. The survey, hopefully you picked one up coming in. You'll have an opportunity to fill this online. So I don't know, vote often, can I say that? One time, Martha says. It's a very short survey. We'd like to hear your feedback, but we also have a comment section. You'll be able to fill it out. And Martha, I had one question. Is some of the master planning documents still on the city's website?
Yes, all of the master plan documents are on the city website, and this presentation tonight will be on the city website as soon as staff can pull it together and put it on there. So all the information's out there, and there's lots of existing information for this project, all the public meetings. So if you need something to do for 3 or 4 days, there's plenty there to read.
Mm-hmm.
How long are you anticipating hearing back?
I wish I knew.
Is this going to be a 2-year wait, a 5-year wait? What do you think?
When we
There
apply,
are 6 bridges here. Is there 7 and I'm missing one? You referred to 7.
yeah, sorry. South Ohio is the other one we're replacing.
Okay.
I didn't list that one. So let's go back to the core schedule. I know I said I wouldn't take questions, and here I am.
Yes. Sorry.
No, it's all good. So this is our anticipated core timeline. Now, this requires funding. So the Corps has to review it and authorize us to move forward. And that's a big question. So the Corps' internal program, the additional public meetings, that should be completed within 12 months. So it's already a year out. And then we have to get the project partnership agreement signed, and then we have another 3 years. So,
Regardless of what we select.
yes.
Okay. So chances are you would have responses back.
So the question is, regardless of alternative 1 or 2, it's at least 3 years, and I'd say yes. So either alternative is a ways in the distance. So one of the important graphics we covered is we're not going to follow a linear path. We want multiple funding options, and we want multiple pieces of movement. Also, I want to build my bridges first. I want to build them in the dry. They're going to be cheaper, and then we want to turn the water on. But I don't want to build bridge over mud. So I want to tie those together. but I want to be ahead of the Corps. So our intent is to get this out and into design and get some of these elements constructed that we know the Corps won't pay for. All right, yes.
Yeah, I didn't get everything that was said about the infrastructure bill, how that might apply to this project.
I wish I knew. So the question was, what about the infrastructure bill and how does that exactly apply to this project? It's new. It's just coming down through the Corps system. I hope to hear more in about 6 months through the Corps system what that means for this project. And it's just simply too new. It's too large of a program for us to know for sure. At the City Commission, the Corps gave a brief presentation. And they said it's going to inject more money into the small cap program than has ever existed in this program in the past. So he's anticipating several projects moving forward. Yes, sir.
It was noted at the City Commission study session meeting that any federal grant that you go for comes with a $50,000 fee to go for that grant. Is that correct?
So I don't know if everyone heard. So the question was, any federal grant you go after comes with a $50,000 fee. So the grant application, so the RAISE grant is particularly, I think, the one we talked about at the City Commission. That requires a transportation cost-benefit ratio, and so that would have to be calculated. That is some effort there. So there would be some engineering time devoted to that, but the rest of the program could be developed in-house with staff. Now, that still takes time and effort, but it's somewhere around a $50,000 would be pretty close of the external cost. Some of
Grant or for all of them? So in other words, per grant, $50,000?
So the cost-benefit ratio is a requirement for federal funds. So pretty much any federal fund you go for will require a cost-to-benefit ratio. So once you develop it once, every program has some unique twists. It'd be fairly easy to modify that. So that upfront cost then helps you secure some of these other grants. And the KDOT program, for instance, would use that same cost-benefit ratio. And so there would not be a $50,000 every time. So, John, was there something you wanted to say?
I think I was just going to add a little bit more to the infrastructure bill. I mean, we're all watching the news and learning about how that would be implemented. I don't think the Corps of Engineers is ready yet to explain all of that. That is still something that is commonly, you know, when we receive stimulus funds several years ago, there was a significant wave of stimulus funding that came through, and it takes some time for the processes, the guidance for implementation for that to come through the federal systems. It'll eventually land at the Corps of Engineers, who will then work it through their division down to districts. And so we're in close communication with the Kansas City District to see that this project is considered front and center for that kind of funding.
Yes, question in the back.
I don't know if the question's for you or Martha, but I was wondering, how much has the city invested so far in getting to this point?
We have paid for the 30% design, and that's a little over $3 million for the entire 6.8 miles. And that will be our roadmap for the rest of the future. We started initially thinking we'll just pick a piece out of the center and lay it out. As we went through and worked with our steering committee, we found we refined it so much that doing the whole layout so that we know it flows downhill and all the pieces connect turned out to be real valuable. And really having that document in our hands when we go to look for these federal funds, we're so far ahead of a lot of other communities because we have a plan. And they look at that very favorable when you're looking for grants and dollars. So little over $3 million.
Will that count towards our contribution
The trick to that question is, until I have a partnership agreement with the Corps, anything I spend beforehand doesn't count. Am I correct? As far as engineering and those fees, it has to happen after we sign the agreement. Now, the land and the easements and those type of things fall into play. Am I correct? Okay, so.
And that's specific for the core funding. So the public meetings, the public surveys, the public involvement process always goes into that. That's already done. That doesn't have to be redone or repaid for. So those elements move into that grant specifically.
Yes.
Alternate 1 and alternate 2 on your maps stops at Iron Street. Is that the only scope of this alternate 1 or alternate 2? Is it Iron Street and nothing beyond to the exit of the channel?
Did everyone hear that okay? Do you want me to repeat the question? Everyone's good? Yes, so the excavation, the part that flows essentially backwards, we have to excavate from Billbrook Park down to about Mulberry Street. Once we get past Mulberry Street, it flows downhill. So the maps show where we're doing the majority of the work. But we're also going to replace Western Star Mill Dam with a series of step pools. So that's on the north side of Iron through Founders Park. We're also going to be looking at additional city components such as a pedestrian underpass on North Ohio. And then at Lakewood Lake, the placement of the sediment for a creation of the walking trails. And then we also have a pedestrian bridge that would go in at Lakewood Lake that allows the river to connect back in with Lakewood Lake. And then we have a weir that would be constructed, how we control the water level of Lakewood Lake and the channel to make sure it's navigable. And that goes just upstream of the driveway that's on the downstream side of Lakewood Lake.
So there's no silt removal needed from Walnut Street on?
It flows downhill from Walnut on. I'd love to excavate additional sediment down there, but we found a cost-feasible option that fit within the core program that gets the water flowing and is deep enough to be navigable.
Because I think, I don't know if I'm hearing you correctly, but I think some of the confusion is, when you say wait longer, what does that actually mean? And what do you think, if you wait longer, construction, I know you can't really give a date, but maybe a little estimate to give people hope of what that actually means? Because I think
Sure.
that's been confusing on how you tell that story. So, thank you.
Did everyone hear Jane's question? All right. So the question is, how long are we waiting for the funding? And if we know how much we're going to get versus how much we wait, it's an easier question to answer. Is that fair?
Yeah, just give them some kind of idea.
Yeah. So the RAISE grant, the Transportation Discretionary Grant, that application, we'll get a hold of it in the spring. That is due in October. And generally we find out on award in the January-February timeframe. So on these bridges we'd like to apply those funds to, we'll know in January-February whether we made the cut. So that one is a relatively quick decision. We know the Corps won't fund it. So I think that one's an easy decision. And if that lands, right now it's what, a $25 million program, and could be going up. And with over $1 billion in funding last year. So I think that one, that's why I highlighted that one. I believe that one has an excellent opportunity, and we find out again in January, February. So I think that one's worth waiting for. The KDOT is a new program, and we'll have to see how that one rolls out. And then the Corps, with their additional funding, they haven't announced which program and when, so we're still a little bit in the dark on that. So I don't have exact answers for you.
So we go with alternative 1 there, wait on the funding and build more. We get the Corvette. If we go with alternative 2, we get a Chevette and we never see the Corvette? Or is there a way to close that over a period of time? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Settling now.
So, did everyone hear the question? So the core deal is a limited time offer, I guess I'd call it that way. Once we turn the water on, we've created habitat. So then the court says we're done. We don't have a need for a federal project there. The local community's already taken care of it.
Got it.
So if we turn the water on, we're done with the core. So it's a one-time only deal.
So is the real question, do we wait and use the money we have and move forward, or do we, well, I'm trying to figure out how to say this and make sense. Do we wait for additional funding and build more, or do we just start now with the dollars we have available, city funding, not wait for the core and build less?
Now means no core.
Yes.
We still might be able to apply for other federal funds, but the core would be out at that point.
What you can't answer is what less looks like and what more looks like.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
got
I wish I could.
it. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I'd be in the stock market at that point, yeah.
Eric,
Yes, sir.
as the expert here in the room, what do you recommend that we do?
Alternative 2,
Alternative 2 and wait?
and wait. So we're going to wait on the core. We're going to, again, this is unique timing. With the infrastructure bill just passed, I have seen in the past communities wait on the core for years. And so I get real hesitant, but this is unique timing. I don't want to let 10 million pass. So I do alternative 2 simply because it scores the best. It moves us up the list, and let's see if we can capture this. But let's not stop there. Let's go for the other transportation funds, because I know the infrastructure bill is going to be specifically funding those other areas. So I'd wait on the core, pick alternative 2, wait on the core. Let's get these other grants in and see what we can do.
Does that get you squared away? Okay.
Has anything been done? All the silt is going to Lakewood from the river. All right, so you have possibly 55 years of contaminated soil with 76 storm drains coming in it, with fertilizer runoff from streets, oil fertilized from cars, things like that. Have anybody figured out what that could do to the fish population in Lakewood when you dump all that silt in there?
Yeah, so there was environmental samples collected to look for contamination. Typically the contamination comes from, let's say, dry cleaners, gas stations. So we're looking for hydrocarbons, we're looking for solvents. Those are the primary pollutants of concern, and the channel is actually very clean. The sediments, we don't see a lot of, Corps is going to HRTW program, but the Corps is going to want to know and look through those samples to make sure that sediment is clean. Now there are some nutrients in there, and so Lakewood Lake right now turns really green because it has a lot of phosphorus. So when we restore the channel and deepen the lake, it'll actually improve the water quality within the lake. So I don't anticipate negative consequences by placing that sediment on that south side.
Yet you told me at the study session that each of the 76 estimated outlays was going to have a neutralizing station at each one to be able to collect, because this river project is based on clean water. That's what it's all boils down to from the beginning, is getting the clean water. That's what the Corps wants. And you're going to have neutralizing stations. So now you're telling me that there is no contamination from the 55 years that it drained into there to now?
So the question is, what would impact the fish? And so, let me get away from you. I'm getting some feedback. So when we look at the biological processes, we're worried about the pollutants of concern, these hazardous chemicals that would interfere with biological function. What we typically see coming through these storm drains are the plastics, a lot of the inert products. And we do see some nitrogen and fertilizers, phosphorus in particular, and then gravel. So generally I don't see a lot of the contaminants that would come into the system that would be negatively affect Lakewood Lake. Now, so your question is, what about the stormwater improvements? We designed to the 30% level most of the drainage area, the urban drainage area, 5 square miles that come in, ways to capture trash, the floatables, and drop out some of the urban sediment that gets in there. And so those have been designed. Those aren't part of the core project. Those exceed the Corps' funding. But am I particularly worried about the biological processes of that? No. Does it matter that should the community try to have clean litter prevention program? Absolutely. And also working with the community not to place excessive salt, not to use excessive amounts of sand and gravel. Those sort of things absolutely will keep that water cleaner and improve the biological function. But right now, the soil sampling done shows that we're not dealing with pollutants that would have negative biological function.
And you're gonna take the silt and put it on the south end of Lakewood so that you can build all of the canoe trails and everything else. You do realize that riverbed silt's not workable.
So I don't know if everyone heard the question. So the question is basically when we dig out this silt, it's mud, it's slop, you can't really build on it. We have in the past, but it's going to have to be a wood chip trail. We'd never put concrete on top of it. It will shift and settle over time, but as we place it, we will be using materials like lime. We also have used fly ash in the past, but we will dry these materials as we place them to make them more workable. And we collected geotechnical samples all the way through the bottom of the channel, and we used a geoprobe to really identify the soil properties that we're going to be digging out. It actually is a tremendous amount of sand and gravel. If you look by weight, it's predominantly sand and gravel, which is interesting. I wasn't expecting that when we first looked at this project.